Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. The pandemic caused by the new coronavirus has upended American life as we knew it. The government has ordered some businesses closed, others face frightening new challenges, and people in many cities find their freedoms curtailed with changes by the week and sometimes the day. Through it all, the work of the legal profession continues. And joining us today to talk about the legal ramifications of all these issues is a very fine panel. First, we're joined today by Mark Smith. He's an Associate Vice Chancellor and Dean for Career Services at Washington University, as well as an attorney. Mark, welcome to the show.
Good day to hear your voice, Sarah.
Yours as well. And we're also joined today by Nicole Gorofsky. She's a former prosecutor, and she's now in private practice at Gorofsky Law. Nicole, welcome.
Good afternoon.
And our final guest today is Marianne Sadeh. She's an attorney who specializes in employment issues at Sadeh Harper Westhoff. Marianne, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So my lawyer friends have made it very clear that they are considered essential workers right now. That relieves them from some of the changes going on with businesses. But I'm still kind of interested in how coronavirus has upended the legal profession. And it seems like one of the biggest examples is the court system. For criminal defendants, what happens? You should be able to get a speedy trial. What happens if the government cancels jury trials? Nicole, thoughts on how this is working out so far?
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. And so the United States Constitution obviously grants criminal defendants the right to a speedy trial, and then each state has sort of statutory rights to a speedy trial on top of that. Missouri's statutory right to a speedy trial just says that it has to be within a reasonable time, and generally considers that to be around 180 days. So at least we're not butting up against that time, right now. But, the wheels of justice don't go quickly. And so when you're talking about a court that was already sort of overburdened in sort of all of the areas surrounding St. Louis and federal courts, that 180 days might be a difficult time to fulfill. But again, even the Constitution says there are factors to look at when it goes beyond the reasonable time, which are reason for the delay, the length of the delay, whether there was a prejudice to the defendant. And it just seems like we're looking at public health versus public safety here, and courts are going to have to weigh that on a case-by-case basis when people are looking at speedy trial issues. And it's not 100% clear what's going to happen here.
Mark Smith, do you think this 180-day period will be something that courts will be willing to increase if this pandemic continues to keep things shut down?
I think they might, because reasonable leaves a lot of wiggle room, and reasonable, given the particular situations, might be beyond that. Having said that, I would not be surprised, too, if we see courts, and they're not going to be unlimited ability to make changes, but, adopting some of the practices we've seen occur already in private workplaces. Maybe we have more trials where you have, people appearing remotely. I mean, you still have to, be able to face your accuser and stuff, but there may be some workarounds beyond what a normal, what we think of as a normal trial, where you go into a courtroom where you have a bunch of bodies in the jury box, things like that.
Marianne, what kind of impact do you think this will have on civil litigation?
Well, I think as a practical matter, civil litigation is pretty much closed down at this point. Most courts have entered orders saying that the only people who can even enter a courthouse are people who are associated with some kind of criminal proceeding. And even then, I know courts that are holding these proceedings by video conferencing. So essentially, the civil jury trial system is pretty much on hold. I heard that in St. Clair County, they issued an order yesterday on the Illinois side that there won't be any civil trials for 60 days now. So it varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but I don't think there are going to be any civil trials in the foreseeable future.
Now, at the same time, on the criminal front, there's a lot of people already locked up, some awaiting their day in trial, some serving sentences. The ACLU has asked the Missouri Department of Corrections to release anyone who's at high risk of severe illness or death from COVID-19. Do you think there's any way to do that, Mark, that wouldn't endanger the public?
Well, I mean, I think they're not suggesting you release everyone. They're suggesting this is kind of like the issue with the bail stuff too. It's more releasing people who are not considered a risk. So I think that would be, you would want to balance safety to the general public. So not releasing somebody who's accused of murder and where they might present a danger to the community, versus people who are at high risk for this. Just one other thing I wanted to say about the courts. I don't know if your listeners know this, but Supreme Court is no longer hearing cases right now. And I think, I thought I read somewhere that the last time they had done that was during the Spanish flu outbreak. So
there's some historic precedent here, although very long ago.
But 100 years before. So it very, very kind of, like the rest of our lives, we're in uncharted waters here, and I think people are trying to figure out what to do, and you may see some kind of novel solutions coming up, and then being adopted by other courts and other jurisdictions.
Thinking about going back to these cases of COVID-19 and within jails and within prisons, the Missouri Department of Corrections reported its first case of COVID-19 earlier this week. Nicole, should we be worried that this is going to be an area where this is going to spread like wildfire and take over?
Yeah, I think absolutely any institutional setting. I mean, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I think any institutional setting where people are in close quarters, I think it's going to spread like wildfire, absolutely. And again, like I said before, it's a public health versus public safety issue. Yeah. And the laws of our country actually, in times of pandemics, give our government a lot of leeway in making decisions in these desperate times. And those decisions are going to have to be made. I know for a fact that, at least anecdotally, the prosecutors in our area are making decisions, about charging people, in a much different way than they would in normal times. They're not going to lock people up at this time who, have committed minor offenses. Certainly bail is being considered where there's a factor. They're considering that as a factor of the public health issue. And again, so we're already considering that. People are already considering that in terms of pretrial detention. But now we're talking about people who already have sentences, who are in the Missouri Department of Corrections, that they're serving out time that they've already been ordered to serve. So I think if this goes on much longer, certainly that's going to have to be considered.
It's going to be so interesting to see how some of this stuff plays out and such complicated issues. We need to take a quick break here, but I do want to say when we come back, we're going to specifically talk about some employment issues related to the new coronavirus. And Mary Ann Sade really is one of the foremost experts locally in this field. So I want to encourage you, if you have a question or comment for our panel as it relates to that subject, you can give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Or you can send us a tweet at STL on air. And when we come back, we'll see if we can get to some of those questions. Our legal roundtable today is Mark Smith of Washington University, Mary Ann Sade of Sade Harper Westhoff, and Nicole Gorofsky of Gorofsky Law. We'll take that quick break now, and we'll keep this conversation going when we return. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome back. Our legal roundtable is digging into all the news related to the coronavirus and maybe even more. And today, we're joined by Mark Smith of Washington University, Marianne Sadeh of Sadeh Harper Westhoff, and Nicole Gorofsky of Gorofsky Law. And it feels like this COVID-19 pandemic, it presents a whole host of new issues for employers to deal with. Marianne, something that we've been wondering here is, are employers responsible for mitigating coronavirus risk for their employees? And if so, to what extent?
Well, that's a great question. All our health and safety regulations come from either the federal or the state government. So one of the things that I've been reading is that OSHA is in the process of adopting some new regulations, at least for healthcare workers, that deal with health and safety issues. But I know of no regulation at this point, either at the federal or state level, that would require employers to take these mitigating measures. Now, most employers are going to want to do that. I mean, I was interested to see that some of the grocery chains are putting up plexiglass panels between customers and workers. Just one example of the kinds of things they're doing to try to protect both their customers and their employees. But this is a brand new area, and up until this point, other than for healthcare workers, I have not seen anything that indicates that OSHA is in the process of issuing new regulations.
You'd think they'd want to be on top of this, but there's also a lot going on in the world. Thinking about those grocery store workers, a business that is truly essential has to stay open. Can they require workers to come in or risk termination?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, there are some exceptions to that. Congress passed a new bill about 6-7 days ago that gives employees the right to take leave if they're unable to work because they have to care for a child whose school or daycare provider is closed. It's kind of on the same model as the FMLA. But a lot of employees are not covered by that, even that new law. So that you've got an employer who has more than 500 employees, that new bill does not even apply to them. There's a real
Marianne, can I cut in here? I've just I was kind of horrified to hear that this doesn't apply to people with more than 500 workers. Is there some reason legally that they would get exempted from this?
Well, I mean, it's this fiction that exists that people at big corporations have lots of good benefits and protections, which of course we know is not true. If you work at McDonald's, you have absolutely no opportunity to get paid sick leave, for instance. I mean, it's just a fiction, but it's a fiction that some members of Congress, are operating on.
Interesting. So the idea is, these corporations will already give good benefits. We only have to worry about the smaller companies?
Yeah, that was precisely the idea. And that was the compromise that was made.
Wow. Mark Smith, thoughts on that?
Yep. Well, I was going to actually, what Marianne was saying, well, I agree completely with what she said, that OSHA hasn't done all this stuff yet. I think they're working on it. There is something called the General Duty Clause. It's Section 5A1 of the Occupational Safety Act. Requires an employer to protect its employees against, quote, a recognized hazards to safety or health. And so they could argue that, this virus is has become a recognized hazard. I mean, it's not established, but I think and CDC has issued guidance to employers. I think who else? There was somebody else that had issued, another federal agency, maybe it was the Department of Labor, that had issued some stuff. So I think there could be some protection for employees. Also, if an employer says to an employee, you have to come into work, and the employee is particularly if they're talking to other employees and saying, well, we don't think it's safe, we don't want to come in, that could be construed as protected activity, which is a kind of defined term, and maybe afford some protection to employees. I also think, and I'd be interested in Marianne's opinion of this and Nicole's as well, if I'm a worker, a cashier, and I get virus and I can show that it most likely came from work, I think there's I would believe that would be workers' comp injury and that I would be protected under the workers' comp disability benefits, section. But
Marianne, what do you think that's possible, that could be covered by workman's comp?
Well, the problem is that workers' comp doesn't cover every illness or injury.
Right.
It covers, disability, as Mark says. And so, if you're sick for a while, but you're not super duper sick, then, there's a serious question of whether workers' comp would apply. The other thing that you've got going on here is just a kind of, I guess I would call it some leverage on both sides. On the one hand, these employers that are providing essential services absolutely need these workers right now.
Right.
On the other side, low-paid workers need opportunities to work. So, so everybody's got some bargaining power. And so in a sense, it's a little different than it usually is where, if you say to your boss, gee, I don't want to take this risk. What are you going to do to protect me? The boss might ordinarily say, the heck with you, but in this case, they need those employees. Those employees are critical to dealing with the provision of these services that are so important at this point.
Nicole, do you think at this point employees have some leverage here and they could maybe force their employer to provide safety for them if they're not already doing that?
Yeah, I think this is really ripe for some really clever employee arguments down the line because, as Mark said, that OSHA says that they must provide a workplace free from hazards. OSHA also says that they have to provide personal protective equipment, what we've seen that probably people have seen on Facebook or other social media called PPE, which, that's been the hot button issue in these healthcare workers, that there hasn't been enough PPE provided. But that's going to be the same, I think, with regard to other environments such as grocery stores and places like that they have to provide a workplace free from hazards. And then you combine that with your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and if someone has an underlying condition that could be exacerbated by this virus, they could seek reasonable accommodations to not get that virus. There are potential for some creative arguments there, and I don't think that they are automatically foreclosed. So I do think employers have reason to be concerned about this legal area, even though it is a little bit murky.
Interesting. One of the things I wanted to make sure that we were able to talk about today is the question of HIPAA. This has been such a discussion. The city of St. Louis hasn't released much information about people with coronavirus, and particularly in cases where there have been some deaths. Most of what we know is from family members or people voluntarily sharing their experience, and journalists have really pushed back on that. They say the city should be able to share information, such as whether the deceased had a pre-existing condition. The city says its hands are tied by HIPAA. Marianne Sadeh, any thoughts on who's right in this dispute?
Well, I mean, HIPAA provides protection for actual identification of who we're talking about by name and by information that would make it clear who the person is. So I don't really buy the city's argument on this one. I think the city has a lot of to talk about the kinds of people who are coming down with the virus, the kinds of people who've died without disclosing protected information.
And Marianne, I think we're kind of losing you there, but I think Marianne was able to make that point. Mark, would you agree?
No, I kind of see things. I'm a little more sympathetic to the city on this one. I mean, HIPAA gives a lot of rights to the patient or the patient's representatives, and they specifically say disclosures to the media or others not involved in the care of the patient, it's limited, and so I just think they can do things. They can reach out to talk to people who maybe were in contact with this person, but to do a general release to the media. and I understand. Well, we as the media wants to know how old was this person? Did they have health problems? And I, as an individual, may want to know that, but really, am I going to change my behavior because of it? I mean, it's different than if I was in this store with this person, and and they, I spent half an hour with them. Well, then I know probably maybe I need to get tested or go consult with my physician or something. I think, HIPAA is there to protect the patients. The patient or their representative can always give somebody else permission to talk about stuff. And I think people are just saying, I'm going to be very careful until I get that permission to do that. Also, I would note, HIPAA is a very complicated area of the law. And so, you have people in hospitals dealing with this all the time, and teams of lawyers trying to decide what we can and can't do. So, if I were the mayor, I'd probably be being very careful about what I did too.
So that's one clear vote for caution, and I think Mary Ann was more having a vote saying no, they should give more info. Nicole,
Nicole decide it.
Yeah, Nicole, can you break the tie here? What do you think the city should do?
I'm not a HIPAA expert, but here's my understanding. I mean, I think there's a clear distinction between data, which is collecting information, on a scale to release to the public without any identifying information, and then information about a specific patient. I mean, I think HIPAA clearly states you can't release information about a specific patient or information that allows the public to figure out who that specific patient is. I think that's where the danger lies. But I think if you're trying to say, hey, the data is that these 10 people have died and they had underlying conditions and here's what they were, I don't think that's a problem. So I think, like I said, the clear distinction is between the data without identifying information and this specifically identifying information.
Okay. So there's our tie-breaking vote. It's still somewhat of a really complicated area of the law, but maybe the city could open up a little bit. We just have 1 minute left here. Mary Ann, thoughts on whether we're going to see a big influx of lawsuits over coronavirus-related issues in, say, 6 months to a year?
Boy, that's a hard one to predict. I just think that we're in an area where the question of whether protection is available for a variety of kinds of conduct is just really, it's all developing, right, as we sit here talking about it. So I would say I hope not, because Lord knows we're in a terrible crisis here, and you hate to see that result in second guessing of people and institutions trying to make good decisions. On the other hand, lawsuits get filed.
And that is, that is always the case. Pandemic or not, lawyers are going to lawyer. So, Mary Ann Sadeh of Sadeh Harper Westhoff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure.
And Nicole Gorofsky of Gorofsky Law, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Mark Smith of Washington University, thank you so much as always.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.